おはようございます。今日は月曜の朝早い時間から皆さんいらしていただきありがとうございます。株式会社リパブリックの市川と言います。よろしくお願いいたします。今日はですね、大変素晴らしいゲストをお招きしてますので、この後配信も10時から始めて、英語で、日本語とちょっと行ったり来たりするんですけれども、講演の方は英語でしていただこうと思っています。ちょっとだけ、just before we start, I want to know who's here. せっかくなので、今日、我こそは一番遠くから来たという人。はい、どちらからでしょう？仙台から。京都。さあ、誰が次は多分京都が一番遠いかな。He's from Kyoto, so this morning. So はい、わざわざ京都からしていただいたの拍手を。ありがとうございます。Who works in the government? 行政、政府関係の方は。はい、ありがとうございます。ありがとうございます。じゃあ、企業にお勤めの方は、ね。So quite a few these are more from companies. はい。ありがとうございます。他に大学研究機関というのお勤めの方は、from University? 両方系、もちろん。はい。ありがとうございます。なので、今日は、まず、クリスチャンにお話をしてもらった後には、5本の、今度最近出たエクスパンドというこのご著書ですね。このお話が中心になってくると思うんですけど、これに関する Q&A をして、その後もっといろんなことされているので、もっとエシカルのデザインに関して話を聞きたいとか、幅広く質問をその後受け付けていきたいと思います。質疑応答は英日でやっていきますので。はい。じゃあもう始めてみましょうか。はい。配信
はい、皆さんおはようございます。Good morning, everyone. 武蔵野美術大学の岩崎と言います。My name is Hironori Iwasaki. I'm a professor at 武蔵野 Art University here. Welcome to this event. Such a Monday morning. There are so many people in this room. I'm very surprised. So before moving into Christian's talk, let me a little bit introduce ourselves, our university. We are Musashino Art University. Here we call this building as an Institute of Innovation. This building originally built by Sony and about 50 years ago. And interestingly, Art and Design University renovated the whole building from the company to the space of education and research. Musashino Art University founded in 1929. We are almost 90 years old. And one of the major art and design universities in Tokyo metropolitan area. We have around 4,300 people, undergraduate students and graduate students for 250 students. We have academic program for both design and fine arts. We are in Ichigaya. We call the Ichigaya campus. As a university, for a long time, we have a main campus in a place called Takanodai, which is in Kodaira city, suburb area of Tokyo area. Here in Institute of Innovation, we have an undergraduate program, master program, and also PhD program. And also, we have a research center for social creativity, which host the event for today. We have a cross-disciplinary integrated design education promoting industry academia collaboration. So we have a Muji store recently reopened in this January in the first floor, you can see, and you can visit later on. And as a research center, we have three major themes, which is design for local community, design for education, and also design for policy and government. I'm mainly in charge of design for policy and government. Let me show you a little bit some of the example we did recently. This is the research topic, research we did last summer. We conducted research in Finland. We researched on how the ecosystem in Finland helped the design and helped the design for government. And we also, back into Japanese local area, we also did very interesting research in the area called Shiga. We conducted, one of the master students stayed in the rural area of Shiga Prefecture for 2.5 months and did the ethnographic research and see how the circular society was formed in, let's say, 40, 50 years ago, and how what can we learn from their old lifestyle into more future circular design. And just before moving to the talk, we prepared the conversation platform called Slido, which some of you might familiar with. Please search for SLIDO in the search window, and then you can see the window. You can put the code, and please put the code 425954. スライドという質問プラットフォームを用意しているので、スライドと検索してもらって、この番号を入れてもらえれば、質問をすることができます。So question is accepted in English, of course, but also you can put it in Japanese, and then 市川さん、増井さん will translate later on. 日本語でも入れていただいても大丈夫です。後で、リパブリックの皆さんが、翻訳をしていただいて、クリスチャンに伝えていただけると思います。はい。So, okay. I have a great honor of introducing speaker, Mr. Christian Beison. Let me introduce a little bit about Christian before his talk. As a CEO, Christian leads the Danish Design Center, non-profit foundation backed by a Danish government. Pursuing missions across green, digital, and social transitions, the DDC creates new opportunities for innovation and sustainable growth for business, organizations, and designers. Christian recently published the book, Expand, Stretching the Future by Design, which I have with me right now. In this book, Christian propounds 6 ways of expanding thinking that can change traditional technology orientation, drive new creative thinking, and pave the way to more sustainable futures. During this talk, he will share some of the insights from the book by providing a range of examples from around the world, including the work of Danish Design Center. We are delighted that he is joining us today. Please give him a warm welcome, Christian.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Very pleased to be here, and thanks so much for the opportunity and for organizing this, and many of you for coming from so far away. I'm also, one of my roles is also to be on the board of the Royal Academy of Design, Architecture and Conservation in Copenhagen. And I recently did a tour of some of the design facilities, and I just wish we had something as nice and as new and as beautiful as you have here. I'm very impressed by the school and by the facilities in this building. So we'll get the slides going, and I'll speak for around maximum 45 minutes. We'll have time for Q&A. We'll have time for a more broad conversation. So I've really looked forward to also hearing the response and your ideas based on the input from the book. When you write a book, you're always interested in hearing what it makes people think. And so my co-author and I are, of course, really keen on that. So very briefly about the Danish Design Center, we believe that we can and should bring the thinking, the sensibilities, the methods, the tools of design to both people and organizations. And by doing so, we can hopefully better achieve the sustainable world we need through creative and innovative thinking and practice. We are foundation, as was mentioned, and been around since 1978 as one of the world's oldest design centers. As was mentioned, we work very much around what we call problems worth solving. So for us, it's important not only to say that design is good, but try to demonstrate it through real impactful work across many different sectors and levels. This is our beautiful building. Unfortunately, not designed by a Danish architect, but by a Dutch architect, which has led to the building being voted among the top 5 most ugly buildings in Copenhagen. Not number 1, but top 5. And we do like it though, and I think one important point for you to know is that this building called Blocks is not just the home of the Danish Design Center, it's also the home of the Architecture Center, of an institution called Creative Denmark, and of a co-working space where 1,000 people, designers, architects, engineers, technologists, go to work every day to collaborate around the future of cities. So the theme and the idea of the building is to be this ecosystem around the future of city innovation. And being in the heart of Copenhagen, it's a bit symbolic because Copenhagen as a city is often ranked the most livable city in the world. One reason being that the harbor here you see is clean. You can actually swim in it safely. And so in the summertime, this is not the summer, but you'll see a lot of people wearing very little clothes, jumping in the water and sunbathing right outside our windows. It was really interesting to hear about the circular project run by the university here, and that's also a big focus area for us. So the green transition and how to make it attractive, how to make a sustainable and climate neutral future something that customers and citizens will choose because it's attractive, not just because we have to or being forced to. We work on, I'll say a bit more about that later, but about the digital transition, as was mentioned, and the ethical side of that. And we work quite a lot also on social innovation and on 2 big areas that we think are problems that are worth addressing. One is mental health for young people, and the other one is the future of aging. So what is the future of design or design thinking? My co-author, Maarten, and I, we sat down and had a lot of long conversations about what to write about if we were to write a book together around this question. He is an entrepreneur, a design philosopher, and also co-owner of a strategic design agency, very much working in the private sector. And I come from political science, have worked very much in the public sector and for the public sector. And we together thought that we could maybe do something or write something together about how we see the future of design. And of course, as many of you know, design is a very, very broad human ability that in principle everyone has to change our physical or artificial environment in ways that serve our needs or that create better lives, more value, also sometimes more profits or more impactful services. So this is the definition I'm coming from and we are coming from. I want to tell a story about where design has come to today. And this is a story that's close to my heart because it's concerned with the public sector. A while ago, in around 2014, one of the largest healthcare systems in the world, called Veterans Affairs. It is the United States health system and social system for military veterans. It was in crisis. And it was in quite massive crisis because American veterans that were in need of healthcare and were waiting for services were waiting so long that a lot of them passed away while they were waiting. So they were waiting for years and years, and they simply died before they could get access to services. That became a very, very big problem and a scandal in the United States. It became a scandal that big that back then the president was Barack Obama. And as you can see in this picture, he has a very serious conversation with the leader, the CEO of the Veterans Affairs, to the point where, not so long after this picture was taken, a few months later, the director had to step down. He basically lost his job. But one thing, of course, is that there are implications for senior managers when things go wrong. Of course, the more human side of it is that this is simply a tragedy for the thousands and thousands of veterans who are waiting for services they never got. So the question is, how do you solve it? Fortunately, at the time, the American government ran a program called Innovation Fellows. And they were lucky enough to have a designer that was appointed Chief Design Officer of the Bureau of Veterans Affairs. Her name is Sarah Brooks. And together with a team and with outside help as well, Sarah and her colleagues started out redesigning the entire Veterans Affairs service system. They took the point of departure to start out by mapping what does the system even look like. Nobody knew. Nobody understood what is this organization, where do we touch citizens, what digital services do we have. And as they did it and mapped it out, they found out that the organization here had 450 different websites. 450 different websites. No wonder that citizens couldn't really navigate it. They did a visualization of the entire service offerings. And the visualization, I've seen it. It looks like the London Tube map. It's so complicated. It's so detailed. They had to fold it out in, multiple pieces of paper. I sat down in a cafe in Washington, D.C. one time with Sarah, and she showed it to me. It was just incredible. A lot of work just in mapping what are we already doing today, and of course to understand also where are we failing. And then they did what designers do best, which is to map out and draw the new service journey and understand the human process of accessing services. And of course, simplifying things to the point where they built a single website, just one website, non-stop entry point for citizens. If you want to see what the solution looks like from a macro perspective, you can't really see the details here, but it's basically a very, very simple idea. You serve, and then you separate from the military, you live civilian life, and you age, and you pass away. Those are the phases. That's the journey of citizens. And then for each of these steps, of course, there are many, many different types of service offerings, insurance and healthcare and social services and job search and all kinds of things that they then map out. And having this blueprint, you could then design everything around the citizen experience. Simple. Not so simple, a lot of hard work. But my point is the following. We know how to do it. Good designers, good service designers, strategic designers can do this. And they're doing it all over the world. This is not a unique example. All over the world, this is where we are today. That's great. It's also very valuable. So, for example, New York Times had been very, very critical of course, the situation. Here's a quote about the ambitions and some of the impacts of the service that to create an intuitive, good user experience that people even want to use again. And maybe even more importantly, that as Sarah calls, she says it's the currency of the Veterans Affairs. It's the way to measure value or measure success is really trust. And the level of trust increased by 25 percentage points, which is incredible increase in trust, of course, from a quite low level, but still it's an indication of what happens when we do great design and human-centered design. We also increase trust, whether it's in government or whether it's in business. So we have gone pretty far with, you could say, I'm just calling this design thinking. We could call it human-centered design. We could have called it, to some extent, digital design. But let's just use design thinking as the term we start with. We've gotten pretty far. And the term has been applied now for the last decade or more in business and in government. And honestly, we know how to do it. We know how to do it. But we also know that there are limitations. Famously, Natasha Jen here, American designer, did a very pointed YouTube talk around the problems with design thinking. And Roberto Vaganti here from Milan Politecnico and now from Stockholm School of Economics wrote a book around how we have too many ideas, too much design, and we certainly have so much design, so many things, so many products that we are well on our way to destroying the planet. So we, in a way, have become too successful, and we've also maybe become so successful with the talk around design thinking that it's been reduced to something it is not. So for example, when I visited a very large global technology company a while ago, a software company, they showed me into a little white space, which was part of their big innovation facility. They had a little small white room, and they had Post-its in the room. And they said, this is the design thinking room. That's where you go and do design thinking. And then I was not sure what they did in the other rooms, but it was something else. And I was thinking to myself, if this is where we've gotten, that it's just about white walls and Post-its, then we have a problem. And in a way, that's the kind of problem we're addressing in the new book. So some of the challenges in design thinking that many of you are probably familiar with and that we need to reflect on are things like, are we building critique and reflection and feedback well enough into design? Do we have a language around beauty or form or giving shape to services? Because we all know that that's, of course, a very large part of the power of design. Do we consider the time horizon we're designing for? What about the speed? I mean, sometimes we don't have 2.5 months to do ethnography. Sometimes we have to react and act quickly, not slowly. We are reducing the idea of the user and sometimes also the idea, as I said before, of space to something very, very simplified. But users are human beings, and they can be many, many different shapes and forms, of course. Is there passion? Is there love? Is there energy in design thinking? Or is it just paint by numbers and just follow a process, the process, as they sometimes say? And are we overestimating methods? Methods are great. They're very practical. But to truly transform organizations like the Veterans Affairs, it takes more than methods. It takes leadership. It takes organization restructuring. It takes new mindsets. It takes a new culture. It takes a lot more than process or method. These are just some examples. You can fill out many, many more, of course. So design thinking is more than a process or method or a space. And if that is true, then where do we go? And so this is really the aim and the message we would like to convey is that we need to bring maybe the thinking back into design thinking. We need to reflect on how do we design, who do we design for, where do we design? I'm not sure if you know the story, I've seen the interview here, but it's a really, really interesting dialogue that happened in the 1970s, early 70s, between Charles Eames, the American designer, and a French journalist. And he's explaining to the journalist what design is. And he might as well have been explaining it today, because it's a very, very strong argument for the breadth and the bandwidth and the openness and the flexibility of the design concept. And the journalist clearly gets confused because he says, well, if that is design, what are the boundaries? And Charles Eames is a little bit impolite because he answers with a new question. He says, what are the boundaries of problems? Now, the problems in the 1970s in the world were large, including, by the way, an energy crisis, which sounds a little bit familiar to today. There were also voices in the 1970s, for example, the Club of Rome, saying we have a problem with the environment and maybe even with climate change 50 years ago. Today, those problems have accelerated. We have new problems driven by technology, driven by connectivity, driven by the fact that we are twice as many people on the planet, 8 billion today as opposed to 4 billion at that time. So the boundaries of problems are shifting massively. Scale, urgency, speed, complexity, interconnectedness. So of course, design needs to shift as well, as Charles Eames would have said. So the question is, how should design shift and expand and move its boundaries as the boundaries of problems are shifting? As a discipline, as a professional field that likes to believe it has answers to the climate crisis, to mental health problems, to lack of trust, this field of design needs to not just follow the emerging boundaries of problems, but be in the forefront of them, of course, if we are to be relevant, right? So that was really a key point for us. Now, then it doesn't help necessarily that we are becoming trapped by some very narrow ideas about our technological future. In fact, you can say that we are becoming trapped by a huge lack of imagination of what our future might be like, to the point that some in Silicon Valley have been arguing that we are going for the singularity, that at some point machines will be smarter than us, and at that time it'll either be, bliss or maybe disaster, but that's the end point of technology. That is called determinism. We reject that, because as designers, we can create the future that we want. And of course, we do not necessarily need to end up in a place where technology determines our future. Is this really what we need more of necessarily? Just extrapolating current technology into the future? Do we need the iPhone 20 or the iPhone 25 or iPhone 30, which will probably look quite a lot like the iPhone 14? Small, black, flat. I know these things, of course, changing. There's a metaverse discussion going on, but who drives this? Is it technology or is it us? So in a broader sense, you can say that the field of innovation has been reduced to something that happens in Silicon Valley and the west coast of California, and we need to expand that too. And it's very sort of, I think, relevant to say that here in Tokyo, because we need to look much more broadly at where innovation can happen. Innovations can happen all over the world, in different cultures, at different times. We can even learn about new ideas from the past, from what has been successful in other cultures, also in history. So we need to expand our geography of innovation to really, truly embrace ideas coming from anywhere, and also from systems that we might not ideologically like so much. In the book, we actually have a story about innovations from Russia that were really interesting and successful, but we never adopted because that was part of the Soviet Union at the time. Today, you would probably have the same challenge, that nobody wants to look to Russia or to other countries like that for new ideas, but they can happen anywhere, and they're not necessarily ideological ideas. They can be ours for the taking if we want to. An example could be this one. I don't know if any of you know it. Have any of you seen or used one like this? Nobody from France in the room? It's a Minitel. It's the kind of French proto-internet, and it was actually very, very widely used by French citizens up through the 80s to connect and to allow people to access services until the internet came along, and of course then this disappeared as well. But it was quite successful, and by the way, driven by government. Or in Africa and Rwanda, where arguably it is with an American company, but pioneering drone delivery of needed supplies, including blood, to remote communities, and being pioneering in also regulation that allows for this kind of service. Again, Rwanda is not an ideal country, but they've really shown the way in terms of taking up this kind of technology. And then, of course, I can't do this without saying that our own town, Copenhagen, has also innovated the idea that you can actually get to work by bicycle. And 60% of commuters in Copenhagen do that, to the point where the idea of transforming a city to be a bicycle city is called Copenhagenization by architects. And one of the cities that's been Copenhagenized is, for example, New York City, where in Manhattan today you'll find lots of bike lanes and lots of bikes around. And now in Copenhagen, the new idea is to maybe not go by bicycle, but to walk. It's crazy, isn't it? Think of the idea that you're walking around the city, which is, by the way, something New York, of course, has done for a long time. So we are also arguing that you don't have to get to Denmark per se, but that the idea of designing consciously for prosperity, for services, for a good society is something anyone can do. We can look around the world for the best ideas, and we can apply that in our own countries, in our own cultures. This is a quote from the American political scientist Francis Fukuyama, who famously said that all countries want to get to a place that is a bit like Denmark, or a little bit like Japan, in the sense of a modern welfare state that takes care of people and still has room for growth and business. It's something, of course, we're talking with many colleagues about here in Japan as well this week. So the big design argument is that anybody can change the world, of course, if we want to. and we sometimes forget it. But at a time of crisis like this one, we have to remember it. Remember, we can unleash our imagination and create a better world. So we are proposing 6 ways of doing that. And that's probably just a start. We're hoping that the idea of expanding could become widespread among those who work creatively, among designers or innovators, to say that, well, here are 6 ideas for how to expand our thinking, stretch our minds, but there could be others. I already have some ideas, and I'm sure others would have it too, and what could be other expansions. But the ones that we propose in the book are these 6. And I'll go through 3 of them in detail to give you a sense of what this is about and give some examples. But very overall, time, of course, is about the time horizons we design for. Proximity is about who do we design for? How close do we feel to the problem or the people we are designing for? Life is around the changing, expanding conceptions of what is living, what is not living in the world today, including in the digital world. Value is about what kind of value are we designing for? Dimensions is about how do humans and non-humans, how does AI and people work together in new ways, and what's the future of stretching the dimensions of design, both digital versus physical, but also in different scales. And then sectors is about how do we see the future of public, private, civic, academia, and other sectors, how they work together, and how do we expand our perspective on that. So now you know overall what the book is about, but let's dive into a few examples. I'll go through 3 of the expansions in a bit of detail, just to give you a sense. So on time, a few years ago, Harvard Business Review had an article about why managers need to read more science fiction. Why did they do that? Or why is it relevant? And why is it relevant that so many organizations now are beginning again, just like in the 1970s, to look to foresight and scenarios and futures in a bigger way than they had for a long time? Well, I think it's because the future looks so uncertain and so difficult. And we also often have a dystopic, negative view of the future, that we need to stimulate our thinking through the visualizations and the ideas in science fiction that also could go for movies. Also to understand some of the dilemmas in the future as technology is changing very, very rapidly. It's almost like we're living in the future, but the question is, what future are we now designing for? So that's the big question. What's the time horizon? How far into the future are we designing for? And of course, also what future? As an example from the DDC's work, we decided that mental health among young people would be a challenge to look at. In Denmark, 1 in 6 young people, when they turn 18, have a diagnosis in the psychiatric system. 1 out of 6. 40% of girls between 15 and 25 say they are in poor mental health. It's like a pandemic after the pandemic. It's a huge, huge problem, and it seems to be a problem in many other OECD-style countries. So how can you work with that on such a systemic, long-term challenge? Well, one way of working with it is to imagine what a future could look like by, well, far into the future, 2050. And so we've involved local governments, policymakers, business people, designers, and obviously young people as well, in exploring what might a future be like in 2050. We've done scenarios first. We're standing on top of a lot of academic research about the current system. We've involved young people in collaborative workshops and co-design, including during a large democracy summit on an island in Denmark last summer. And we have young people who are articulating that through the workshops and through being involved, they see there is a possibility to change the system. How psychiatry works, how services work, perhaps how we relate to digital services, how schools work, asking new questions about what are the root causes of bad mental health. And then the power of design in that kind of work, what is that really? Well, part of it is, of course, all the methods and tools for engagement and involvement and creative collaboration. But a part of it is also imagining what the future could actually be like. So based on the scenarios, we developed a set of principles around what might a positive future for mental health be like. What are the principles? And then we said, how would those principles, those key takeaways, be like if we created a city where that's actually the case? So going from abstracts to concrete, of course, a key move in design work, right? The city we call Vorby, and Vorby means our town, literally, in Danish. But our town doesn't exist, of course. It's an imaginary city. We're using it to stimulate our thinking and our conversations, our imaginations, to the point where we even created the city map, all these different locations, and each location has different functions that are articulating how education would be different, how learning would be different, how work would be different, school would be different, help with mental challenges would be different, family would be different. So really opening up the space, and not just doing it with a map and stories about places or institutions that would be radically different, but also bringing the human and the context into the situation. So we created a series of films, each 3 or 4 minutes, where actors are playing future people who would be living in this world, like the young people here. This is a scene from one of the films where they are taking part in an after learning activity, sort of a hobby activity that's facilitated by a new set of a type of learning facilitators in this community. So really bringing that world to life, not because we think the future should be exactly like that, but to stimulate thinking and push our ideas about what would be possible, and to create empathy, insights into what it would be like and could it feel like to be in that world. So we start empathizing with that future. So to conclude on time, of course, in the book, there are so many different examples, but to say these are some of the questions, just a few of the questions we might want to ask ourselves as we're facing a challenge and as we want to stretch our thinking, our imagination. So proximity, another example of an expansion. Well, what does proximity mean? It means closeness, of being close to something or someone. And we believe that to act ethically, responsibly, we need to feel close to whatever it is we're designing for. So often we forget what closeness is about, right? You might wonder what this is. Some of you might think this is a spacesuit. Kind of is, but actually it's a prototype. It's a prototype of a spacesuit that's adjustable in size. And the reason is that NASA, the American Space Administration, got very, very embarrassed a few years ago because they were sending 2 women into space at the same time to do a spacewalk. And to do a spacewalk, you need a spacesuit. A couple of weeks before launch, they realized they only had 1 spacesuit that would fit a woman. So how embarrassing is that they forgot the clothes? They didn't have the clothing for the astronauts, and they had to postpone the launch by a half a year. How expensive do you think that is? How can you forget to design for half of the population? Now, this is an article about when it actually happened, and they did get into space. And as you can maybe see in the headline here, it says 2 women on Earth had a chat about 2 women astronauts in medium-sized spacesuits. It's a little hint that the whole reason that they are there now is that they finally got the 2 spacesuit size medium that they could fit. What I'm arguing here, what we are arguing is that proximity means to ask yourself, who or what are we designing for? And we're forgetting to design not just for women, but designing for minorities, designing for marginalized communities, designing for the disabled, designing for those that need to be included. I mean, even today in 2023, there's more than 50% higher chance of serious injury or death if you're a female in a car accident. That's a simple thing to perhaps fix, but there are other things we need to fix that are much more challenging, perhaps, or more difficult. So the question becomes, how can we create this sense of closeness and understanding of the reality of what we're designing for, so we can drive some action? Another example is from the Red Cross in Copenhagen. They have an experience center for around refugees and around the work of the Red Cross to drive empathy and feeling of closeness, to stimulate our thinking. When you go to see the experience, you take on a pair of rubber boots, look like this. but inside the boots, it feels like you're walking in mud. It has a gel inside them, so the experience when you walk around is like you're walking in a very, very soggy ground. To get a feeling of experience with the situation in refugee camps, which apparently are very, very wet and soggy. And as the director of the exhibition says, you really have to give people a voice and create this kind of experience to drive empathy, and then to drive behavioral change around this problem of assisting and helping and understanding the role we need to play with refugee camps. Another example is the Danish Icelandic artist Olaf Eliasson, who's put down big blocks of ice that have fallen off the ice cap in Greenland in cities around the world. London, Paris, this is from Copenhagen. Why would you have big block of melting inland ice in a square? Well, to drive empathy, to help people see that there's something going on with the climate, and to inspire action. Of course, we won't save the climate by putting blocks of ice in town hall squares, but we might, as one point among many others, remind people what it is that we are fighting for here. And as Olafur says, we have all the data. It's not reports from the IPCC we need. We have them. We'll get more of them, and they're all very, very terrible to reading. But we need to combine this cognitive experience with the human tactile feeling of the problem. And of course, that's the power of design, to work with the senses, including the sense of listening to the cracking ice and to seeing the water streaming down at the street. Just a very brief case example from our work at DDC, which is really also about extending, asking questions around who do we design for and what's the impact of our design. So just briefly, because it's about the question of ethics and ethical behavior. So we know that a product can be good and can be not so good. But we also know that in time of artificial intelligence and the growth of technology, that's increasing the risk that we are designing products and services that are not good for people. As an example, do you know what the biggest competitor for Netflix is? Netflix's biggest competitor that designers at Netflix are combating every single day is our sleep. That's what they want more of. When I take our sleep and use it for binge watching series, right? They're certainly taking my sleep, including last night, actually. So, but just because you can manipulate people, or you can get them to do a use a service, or get young people to be highly addicted to their screens, or adults, should we do it? There's no law against it, but should we do it? That's ethics. And so we are asking at the Danish Design Center whether there's a third way, talking about the global situation, to not do as they do in the US, which is to move fast and break things and do whatever you can, or to do as they are doing, honestly, in a very, very large country close to this one in Asia, where you control behavior and control people through data. But where there's maybe a third way, a European way, a Nordic way, maybe a Japanese way, where we say we are going to design technology that helps people achieve what they want to do and set us more free, not less. Make us less addicted, not more. So can that be a competitive factor for companies? Can that be a factor for the government? So we worked with a series of organizations, designers, large companies, banks, pharmaceuticals, all kinds of institutions together to design what we call the Digital Ethics Compass as a toolkit to help us empathize, help us understand if we build a product, is it good for people? That can be relevant in many situations, but certainly when you begin to make products intelligent. How do you put the human at the center? So that could be around automation, asking ourselves, what kind of mistakes can machines make? And how do you make automated responses transparent and accessible? This is all online, and this is a free tool that's, public good, so you can always look at it online. But these are some of the questions we're asking with the tool around automation. We're also asking questions about behavioral design. How do we avoid manipulating? Have people do things that are not in their best interest, which of course can clash with the business model, or clash with profit, or clash with government priorities. But how are we responsible around that? And also about data. How do we, of course, ensure people's privacy? And how do we not necessarily collect all the data we can just because we could do it? That's what ethics is. Not doing things even though we could. So these tools are online. You can go take a look at them. It's very comprehensive. It's also physical to print, but also digital. And so to say, just to round off, that proximity is about some of these questions. Who do we care for? How do we expand who or what we care for as we design? Could we design more ethically? Could we go far away, also culturally, to learn about how to do it? And what about other species? Do we need to not just design for humans, but designing for other living things? That's also what we talk about in expanding life. Finally, on value, just a few reflections on how do we expand value. Now, the success of design, historically, globally, has also been because of the success of business and designing for economic growth and profit. And that's really shaped our world in many ways. Does anyone know who this person is? Robert Kennedy. So the younger brother, not John F., but Robert. Yes, exactly. Robert Kennedy, who ran for president and also, unfortunately, was killed at the time. He famously spoke around value. He said, GDP, gross national products, the way we measure the financial standing of nations, does not measure what makes life worth living. It measures none of the things that we as people actually care about. And actually, it measures some of the better things. For example, a war will increase spending and to some extent GDP. A traffic accident is positive in GDP. Illness and sickness is positive in GDP. What's up with that? Why don't we measure what's good? And since his speech in 1968, no nation has truly come up with an answer to that. Even though they've tried around well-being, around happiness, around other metrics, we're still comparing nations on this. And that's coming from a country where we actually are rated often the most happy nation on the planet, and still our government doesn't really care about it and keeps measuring GDP mostly. So if that is the case, what's the role of design and designers? How do we rethink what is valuable way beyond economics? That's the expansion. That's the question, to really go beyond this. Unfortunately, that is also happening. We're seeing companies going from waste models to circular models, as you're very well aware. But it's not easy to do, as Peter from Accenture says here. When you see a piece of trash like this, do you see something that is just to be burned in a waste to power plants? Or do you see, as Miniwiz from Taiwan does, the possibility to transform it into an intensive care unit for COVID patients and rebuild this entire unit mostly from recycled plastics? That's the power of circular economy, and also adding value not just to the environment, but to healthcare as well. A case in point, from the European Union, there's a huge push right now for transforming cities to be climate friendly. One big program in that context is called the New European Bauhaus, responding to the original Bauhaus in Germany, and is also, of course, a German president of the European Commission right now, and Ursula von der Leyen. So there may be a coincidental connection there between her nationality and the interest in the Bauhaus. But what we are working on is a program that says, can we create a sustainable and beautiful and socially inclusive future for cities? And can we ask architects and designers to lead the way? And when Ursula von der Leyen launched that program, we thought, that's interesting, that a political leader at that level is asking creatives in arts, in design, in architecture to drive the transition and focus on 3 different kinds of value at the same time. And so we immediately pitched for that from the Danish Design Center and with many, many other partners. And we said, how do we then create this circular but also irresistible society? How do we create cities that are truly attractive and beautiful and inclusive? And so that's been our sort of program around that. And now we're working with, for example, social housing in these cities and others in 7 locations around Europe that are all sort of in need of not just climate adaptation and carbon work and energy work, but also to be beautiful. and to be places that are socially inclusive and good for people. Many of these places, including this one, is actually characterized in Denmark as a ghetto with violence and low economics and so on. So expanding value is about some of these questions, to go across social, economic, environmental value, to really rethink and embed other parameters than financial ones and balance those. Circular economy, clearly, but maybe also networked economy. So circularity is about material flows. It's about it's a very powerful approach, but is it the only one? Maybe in a digital world, you also need to look at interconnected networks in an even broader sense. And in the book, we also talk about rethinking intellectual property. I'll conclude now because I know the time is about up. But just to say that these are all ideas. These are all suggestions to think differently. But there's no value in just thinking. The value is also an action, right? So how can we, in the design community, take some of these principles and turn them into action? And just in a very, very simple framework, well, we could use the expansions, the 6 expansions, to challenge our assumptions as we look at problems, as we rethink challenges or rethink opportunities in a longer time perspective with other types of users, with empathy for other parts of the world, for example. Or for creative fuel to drive ideation, to use it as prompts for better and more ideas. Right now, we're in a world in such crises that we need more ideas, not fewer. We need more imagination, not less. And finally, we could use it as a framework for testing prototypes, for testing the viability of solutions. Because, of course, the power of ideas is that once you've had one, there's really no going back. There's no coming back from great ideas, as Oliver Wendell Holmes said a long time ago. So a few resources, just if you want to pursue this. We are, of course, happy to share all the slides. Just take them and get them from today, the recording from today. Check out our website. See if you can work with us in different ways. These are some of the things that we do with our collaboration partners. Check out tools and toolkits, including the digital tool that's also on the site here. And most importantly, of course, go and get the book. So here's a nice 35% off. So I'm sorry for those of you who already bought it, but then give your copy to someone else and get a cheaper one. This is also going to be in the slides, so you can take a picture or go get it. I hope you will and spread the word. Thank you so much for listening.
すいません、今ちょっとマイクが、配信の関係でもしかしたら1本しか使えないかもしれないので、ちょっと少々お待ちください。Well, you were really punctual with the time, and then you went through so many slides. Yes, that's perfect. 実は今日80何枚ぐらいですね、90枚近い資料を準備してきてくださってるんですけれども。So it is available for them to have a look at the slide as well. 後で、PTX でもじゃあご案内をいたしますので、残りの、3つも含めて皆さんきっとご関心があると思いますので、それも後で、ダウンロードできるように URL を提供させていただきたいと思います。ありがとうございます。さあ、そしたらですね、せっかくいただいたお時間ですので、質問を拾っていきたいなというふうに思っているんですが、どうしましょう。
はい、スライドの方に寄せられた質問からいきたいかなと思っているんですが、一番最初からいきましょうかね。So the question. You ready? Okay.
Out there.
Okay. So the question is, how did the COVID-19 change the role work at DDC, or didn't change? Possibly didn't change. Did it change at all?
Right. So right before COVID happened, or actually around the time it happened, we redesigned the DDC. We decided to recognize that we need to be a human-centered, sustainable organization where people thrive, And so we decided that everyone chooses their own leader every year, and everyone can offer to be a leader for others. We decided that everyone chooses their own area of work freely. We decided to rethink our roles, to not have a role because of our position or title, but because of tasks we undertake. So we transformed the DDC into a self-managing organization. That's a whole other presentation I could do for you around that. And it was very hard, but it's also been very successful to rethink and use design to transform how we fundamentally organize work. Now, during COVID, we were just like everyone else. We worked from home a lot of the time. We came a little bit into the office to stay safe. We did nature walks, and everybody had earpiece. And then we did workshops where people were walking in nature. And Brian was, my colleague, was a big part of that conversation and listened to music while we were walking. We did online Friday bars to have beers together, just like a lot of others did. But what's important is that increasingly we stop controlling people and asking them what to do with COVID behavior, and said, we are all adults. We are all mature people. We know how to take care of ourselves and others. We want to care for each other. We can read the government guidelines. So we trust that everyone will do what's best. And today, we are back, of course, physically in Denmark. We have no COVID restrictions at all. We haven't had that for 1 year. So there are no masks, there's nothing going on, but lots of vaccinations. But we really feel that COVID was a tough time, but also a time to really become the organization we are today.
はい。もともとの質問がですね、この COVID で、新型コロナで、DDC の役割とか機能とかっていうのは変わりましたかというご質問をいただいていたんですけども、ちょうどその COVID が蔓延するというか、流行し始めた前ぐらいですかね、ちょうどぐらいですかね、その前後で大きな組織改変を行っていたと。で、特にそのヒューマンセンタードなオーガナイゼーションにこう変えていくっていうような、動きがあったと。で、その中で、一人一人がリーダーとして、機能したりだとか、一人一人が自分の役割を決めたり、仕事を決めたりっていう、かなりその自律的な組織に変化をしていったというようなところです。で、それに合わせて、皆さんと同じように、COVID 中は、家から仕事をしたりだとか、仕事場に行っても一緒にこのネイチャーウォークですかね、自然の中を散歩するみたいなことをやったりしながらしてたわけなんですけども、そういった活動の中で、やはり組織的に個人をコントロールする、管理する形からもう少しケアだとかトラストだとかそういったものが中心にある関係性に、みんな大人なんだし、ちゃんと政府が出しているガイドラインをですね、読んでくれれば皆さん正しい方法で、仕方で生きてくれるというか仕事してくれるというふうに信じていたので、蓋を開けてみたらすごいその組織的にもよく機能してますし、COVID にもよく対応できているかなというふうに。
I just want to elaborate a little bit about that because you mentioned even the fourth transition pillar for you guys to really to influence the organizational change.
Yeah, so just briefly, as you know, I used to be director of MindLab, the Danish government's innovation team. I've seen many organizations try to foster innovation by creating small teams, but they struggle. It is very hard. And ultimately, the system, the bureaucracy, the administration, the normal way of working tends to win. So I've asked myself whether we should not redesign the entire way we work to unleash creativity, to create more flat and self-managing organizations. And fortunately, there's a huge movement around the world around that. I think that's a space for designers to claim.
もちろんデンマークデザインセンターの前にですね、How many years was the MindLab? How many years? 20? No.
Yeah, so MindLab ran for almost 20 years. I was director for 8 years.
8 years. その前にも、デンマークの中でやっぱり政策とデザインということであれば、マインドラボというのが非常に有名なんですけれども、彼がデンマーク DDC のディレクターに着任する前、マインドラボのリードされてたんですね、8年間。組織としては20年間ですけど、やっぱり小さいチームを作りがちですと。で、ただ、その中で彼が痛感したのは、小さい組織を作って、その中でイノベーションについて、邁進して考えて組織を作っていくんだけれども、やっぱり日常的な実践とか、今までのやり方っていうものがやはり根強くいて、なかなか組織を大きく変えることが難しいと。であれば、組織をどういうふうにその文化からどういうふうに影響を及ぼしていくのかと。日々の行いとかっていうことをどう変えていくかということがやっぱり本質的に考えなくちゃいけないというのが、今回のその変化の契機になったというお話ですね。なので、so it is about the Danish Design Center, but as well as how you communicate and interact and influence the organization.
So we decided to try it and learn. And after we did it to ourselves, we're now trying to share it with many, many others. And on our website, you'll see a whole program we're now doing with, amongst others, hospitals and different institutions to redesign organization.
ですので、皮切りとしてはデンマークデザインセンターで自ら自分たちがどういうふうに組織を改変できるかということをやってみたと。で今はですね、それを病院であるとか、さまざまな機関の中でですね、その同じようなプロセスというのを一緒に設計するということをやっているというような話です。はい。いい質問でしたね。はい。この後はですね、もちろん、このままスライドの方でもご質問を投げていただければ、それを答えていきますし、もちろんそれ以外で、ここの場で、ご質問があれば、マイクを持って、歩み寄りますので、ぜひ、日本語でも英語でもご質問を続けていただければというふうに思います。もう一つぐらいオンラインで拾いますか？
同じく、同じパチさんという方からの、質問なんですけど、So, a question from the same person called Pachi, mysteriously called Pachi. Okay. So, are you going to have more blocks, BLOX? How do you take that many boutique design firms like Bespoke are M&A by bigger consultation firms? Yes, yes.
Somebody following developments in Denmark quite well. Well, in terms of blocks, that's a unique physical building. It's also an idea. It's a space. It's a lot of people coming together across disciplines. It's co-funded by Realdania, which is a large philanthropy. So it's pretty unique, but blocks is also connected with similar innovation hubs for urban innovation around the world. When it comes to mergers, acquisitions of design companies, good design companies by management consultants, I have mixed feelings about it. We know Bespoke, by the way, was mentioned quite well. We worked with them. I think long term, it is not going to be very good for design to be part of McKinsey, BCG, PwC, all the others. Because again, the dominating culture, the dominating system, the dominating values, which are coming from MBAs, will win. And we see that already. I think the future of design agencies is to do as my co-author's company is doing. It's called ManyOne. And they've decided to create a network model that's creatively driven, that is taking on the management consultancies. They call themselves a strategic design hybrid. And I think that could be a model for the future. They are scaling very, very fast. And if you're part of that ecosystem, you are not part of a management consulting firm or IT firm, but you're part of a creative community. So that could be a model.
はい。今のご質問はですね、おそらくはデザイナーの方から、あるいはデザイン領域に詳しい方から、デンマークでどんなことが起きているのかっていうのはすごくつぶさに追っかけてらっしゃるなというような印象を受けました。まず一つそもそものご質問ですね。ブロックスのような 建物や組織っていうのはもっと増えていくんでしょうか。ビスポークのような、いわばブティークなデザインファームっていうのがこう M&A されていく中で、それに対してどんなご意見をお持ちですかというようなことなんですけども、それに対して、ブロックスっていうところ自体はもうフィジカルな、先ほどご紹介があったように、フィジカルな場所で、一つのアイディアを、コンセプトとして立てられたものですと。で、フィランソロピーの、事前のお金で、回っているものでもあるんですけど、いろんなアーバンイノベーションのハブとつながってますよというようなところなんですけども、それと、ちょっと別に、じゃあ、M&A、そのデザインファームの、M&A の状況について言うと、少し、なんていうか、アンビバレントというか、あまり良くは思ってませんというようなところなんですけども、ビスポークとも一緒にパートナーとして働いてみたんですが、とてもいい企業でしたよと。なんですけども、やっぱりそうやって長期的に、マッキンゼーのような大きいコンサルテーションファームみたいなところと一緒になることによって、デザイン領域全体においては、長期的にはあまり良くないだろうと。良くない影響が与えられるだろうと。というのも、そういったその、コンサルテーションファームにいるような、ビジネススクールでの人たちですよね、はある一定の価値観を持って、いると。で、結局はそっちの価値観の方に巻き取られてしまうんじゃないかと。その恐れが、あるということですね。で、実際このエクスパンドを一緒に書かれた方なんですけども、その方が今、それとは別のモデルを確立しようとしていると。で、その方が運営されている会社がですね、メニワンというような会社なんですけども、そこで新しい、What did you say the alternative business model your colleague is?
Yeah, strategic design hybrid.
Strategic design hybrid。ストラテジックデザインハイブリッドですね。はい。っていうモデルを今確立をしようとしているんですけども、これが、今、この大きな潮流として、コンサルテーションファームにこう吸収されていっているということに対する、一つのアンチテーゼとして、見ていくことができるんじゃないかなということです。
When was the time that most of the companies are purchased for M&A? Like past 10, 15 years?
It's over the last 10 years. It's still happening. I had a meeting last week with some of the leading Danish agencies, and just last year, several of them were purchased.
デザインのね、業界にいらっしゃる人はよくご存知だと思うんですけど、本当にこの10年ぐらい、あっという間に、主要なデザインの会社っていうのが、M&A というか合併して、コンサルティングファームの中の一つの部門になったりっていうことが、傾向としてあったので、おそらくこの方としてもそういう傾向ってどうなんだろうっていう、憂慮する思いからこういう質問があったのかなというふうには思っているんですけど、今彼の話だと、デンマークの中でもやっぱり数社、去年もですね、買収されたというような話もありましたので、引き続きそういうトレンドというか傾向というのはあるかなということでした。はい。どうしましょうか。Maybe one more question? There's one interesting question. What efforts are being made at DDC to address the growth of radical UI? AI is becoming a consultant for life and work discussion.
Right. So I think the biggest thing we're doing is, of course, the ethical work on the future of designing for digital. And we have a term we call emancipatory technology. Emancipatory, which is about technology should set people free. And that's, I think, currently our response to start that conversation.
Emancipatory technology. That's what you started to.
That's the theme. That's the overarching idea.
おそらくテクノロジーというか AI に関しては、You're going to talk about more about AI and technology tomorrow as well. There's some other.
Yeah, we're doing several sessions that are opening up this whole approach and the digital compass I mentioned earlier today.
今日はデザインということが一つの大きなテーマでお話をしていただいているんですけれども、彼が今週たくさんの講演がありまして、一部はオンラインでまだ聞けるものが明日も明後日もあるんですが、 そこではどちらかというと AI ということと、先ほども倫理というお話がありましたけども、その辺が大きなテーマになっています。先ほどおっしゃっていただいてたのは、DDC の中ではどういうふうにですね、テクノロジーから解放していくっていうんですかね、解放するテクノロジーというところを一つのテーマとして、探求を始めているという話でしたので、ぜひそちらの方ももし興味があれば、そこもがっつりお話を聞く機会というのが日本にいらっしゃる間にありますので、はい。Probably it's best that they would also hear some of your other presentations coming up.
That's true. That's true. I mean, some things will also be available online. I think in the book, we have the whole chapter on dimensions. And the chapter, I didn't mention it, but we look a lot at the interplay between humans and AI.
Yeah.
And also question how can creatives, designers work together with AI in a positive way. So the future of technology is not technology wins or humans win, but we work together.
章の中にもディメンジョンといって、次元というようなテーマの章があるんですけれども、いかにして AI はデザインとかですね、人間と対立する関係性になるというよりは、いかにしてそれと共存していくかということも一つの大きなテーマになっていますので、ぜひそのあたりもご覧いただければというふうに思います。せっかくなので、日本語でも英語でも大丈夫です。わざわざ月曜の朝からいらっしゃっている皆さんに、ぜひ会場にマイクを向けて質問を拾っていきたいなというふうに。
Well, hi, I'm Hiro Nishiguchi, a professor at Sophia University. Actually, Christian, I have a question. Because today's topic is beyond design thinking. But it sounds like there must be something fundamentally unchangeable principle for design thinking. So could you talk about it, please? Thank you.
Okay, yes. So in the book, we do a brief introduction to design thinking. And we also say that you can skip the chapter if you already know it. But some of the fundamental principles, they are still relevant and strong. The idea of starting with humans or other living things in an innovation. The idea of experimentation and trial and error and learning through prototyping. The tools that have become available to us to co-create and involve many different perspectives in synthesizing knowledge into meaningful, tangible services, products, and so on, are some of the aspects of design thinking that are clearly a jumping off point. As I mentioned in the beginning, the case example of the Veterans Affairs, of the redesign of the entire services towards that healthcare system was done through design thinking. So it is very powerful, used the right way, but we are just arguing we need to go even further than that. I should maybe add the power of visualization clearly as a way of innovating.
はい。ご質問は、デザインシンキング、を超えてというようなタイトルが今日トークについているわけなんですけども、それでもやっぱり根本的に変わらない、プリンシプルみたいなものがデザインシンキングにあると思うんですけども、その特徴というか、その変わらない部分というのはどこなんですかというご質問でした。もし補足と逆にあればお願いします。まずは、やっぱり実験するという、エクスペリメントするというようなことですね。あとはコークリエイト、競争のツールを、提供しているっていうことだったりとか、それを通して、意味のあるプロダクトだとかサービスっていうのを、作っているという、作れる、そんな力を持っているというのが、やはりデザインの変わらぬところかなと。で、やはりそれを一番よく表しているのが、今日もご紹介した退役軍人のシステム、VA の、アメリカの VA のシステムだろうということと、最後一つ付け加えるとすると、ビジュアライゼーションですね、可視化というか、しっかりと皆さんと共有できるような形にしていく力っていうのはデザインにあるだろうということです。
増井さんに難しい質問を私が振っているような気がします。ごめんなさい。はい。ちょっとね、まどろっこしいかもしれないんですけど、ここからは、ちょっと逐次で英語と日本語でやらせていただきたいなというふうに思っていますので、よろしくお付き合いください。次は、一回私が引き取ります。There's one good question. How do you prioritize the themes or issues DDC should work on among a bunch of crucial issues our society needs to tackle? Just translate. 55315さんはここにいるのかないないかなあ、いらっしゃいました。素晴らしいご質問。どうぞ、ちょっと日本語で。
はい。メルカリの小杉と申します。UX リサーチャーをやっております。弊社でもサーキュラーソサエティを作るべく、プラットフォーム作りをしていますけれども、どのイシュー、どういったステークホルダーを、重視して、どのその2つのイシューを解決していくのかって非常に悩む時があります。で、同じような問題を抱えていらっしゃるんじゃないかなと推測して、ぜひこの問いに対してアドバイスをいただければ嬉しいです。
So, as a strategy, we decided that the big transitions in the world around green, environment, climate change, biodiversity, digital, especially around the ethical and responsible digitization, and social, with a focus on where some of the biggest social challenges are, would be our starting point. To prioritize, partly, we listen very closely to government because they are funding around 40% of our budget. And their priority is circular economy. So that's a very, very strong focus in a portfolio of projects we do. Secondly, we listen to our board, which is a board of directors of 8 individuals who set the direction for the DDC. And then, of course, we listen to ourselves in what we are passionate about, where we feel we could make a difference. And as an example, Danish media have been full of stories and data over the last several years around mental health among young people. It's also a government priority, but it's also something that foundations, funders, institutions are addressing. And that's where we offer ourselves and say, we think design and designers can contribute, and we'll show you how.
先ほどもご紹介にありましたけれども、グリーンとデジタルとソーシャルっていう、3つの DDC としてのテーマがあります。で、この中でも何を、倫理的、あるいは自分たちが取り組むべきテーマとするかということはですね、3つぐらい要素があります。一つは出資がですね、行政から4割ぐらいの予算が、出ているということもあるので、一つは行政ともちろんお話をします。で、彼らにとってのプライオリティというのは、サーキュラーということなので、先ほどのお話にもあったように、循環型経済あるいは社会をどういうふうに構築するかというのは非常に大きなテーマとして扱っています。で、2つ目はボードオブディレクターですね。皆さんのこの、DDC を運営するにあたって、役員の皆さんというのがいらっしゃるんですけれども、その8人の方たちとの対話の中で自分たちが何を優先して行うべきかということを考えます。で、最後は自分たちにも問い直すというか、自分たちの中でもその優先順位というのを決めていくと。デンマークの、メディアの中ではですね、ここのところを、メンタルヘルスですね、に関してはかなり、話題となっていて、たくさんの財団ですとか、あるいは組織というのがこれらをどういうふうに解決していくかということを、重要な問題だというふうに掲げていて、自分たちとしてもそれに取り組みたいというのがあったという話です。I remember in the previous conversations we've had, you said that, of course, doing circular economy and tackling that can be a very, already can occupy you 100% of your work, whereas you specifically thought that digital and social transformations or transitions is something that you need to still deal with.
Well, so I think that as a National Design Center, we have an obligation partly to keep rediscovering the role of design as such in society, but partly to be relevant for some of the key challenges our society is facing and put the challenges first when it comes to also potential business growth. And there are more challenges than the green transition, even though it's very important. And so for us, it's a question of being broad enough to stay relevant as the only national design center we have.
国立のデザインセンターということなので、非常に、循環というかサーキュラーということはですね、社会的な変化ももちろんなんですけれども、経済的な、インパクトというのもあるということで、非常に重要なテーマではあるんですけれども、それに限らず、後半にですね、いろいろと重要なテーマというのを自分たちの中で、決めてやっているというようなお話でした。はい。素晴らしい質問をありがとうございます。素晴らしい質問が2つ続いたところで、もう1つじゃあ、どんどんプレッシャーをかけ続けていきます。
すみません。最初の質問させていただいたパッチと言います。I'm the one who questioned the first question. And what I'm going to ask is that related to the answer now. You said that the member of the DDC has chosen their own work by themselves. And now you said that the big theme is designed or chosen by DDC board members. So what's the balance? And if the one of the members, stick to one idea of his own, so how do you manage? That's my question.
You got me. So it's a balance, right? Because we are an organization that relies on relationships with others. We are listening to our surroundings. We want to be in resonance with society and the challenges around us. We also have a strategy, and that was built by their colleagues inside the organization, but decided by the board. So we proposed to them green, digital, social, and they debated it quite a bit, and they said, okay. So that's the framework we're working inside. And inside that framework, we can then move pretty freely around. And for example, take up the digital ethics, which it's not in a strategy, it's something we decided. Or decide mental health, or another program on the future of aging. Or we decide that we think redesigning organization is really interesting when it comes to the future of design. So that's how we strike the balance.
パチさん、どうもありがとうございます。パチさんからのご質問は、クリスチャンの最後の方の、質問の中で、質疑応答の中で、COVID でどういうふうに働き方が変わりましたかで、DDC の役割が変わりましたかっていう質問に対して、自分たちで、その職員が自分たちで仕事を選べるような、もっと自律的な、組織になりましたよというようなバイトだったんですけど、それと、ちょっと見た目上もしかしたら矛盾があるかなというところで、ボードメンバーですね、その役員の人たちの意向も組むっていうようなことが、さっき、その予算を4割ぐらいもらってるということもあってっていうようなお話が先ほどあったんで、そこのバランスはどう取っているかという、ご質問でした。で、それに対して、基本的には、我々はいろんなところ、自分たちの環境とか自分たちの周りにいるステークホルダーの言ってることを聞いてと、それは自分たちの職員も含めてということなんですけども、ただその、自分たちのそのフレームワーク、その DDC が使っているというか、フレームワーク、でいくと、まずはその DDC の中で、一緒考えて、で、それこそグリーンとソーシャルと、もう一つ何でしたっけ、デジタル、この3つの方針を打ち立てるというか、これでいきたいと思いますというふうに、ボードに諮るという、で、それでそのまま通る時もあれば、今回のようにすごいディベートが長く続いて、じゃあその3本でいきましょうというふうに、許可が下りるというか、それで成立するっていうような、流れがあると。で、この流れの中であると、ある程度の自由は保障されているので、そのあたりで先ほど言ったようなその自律的な組織が回っていくというような、ことでした。
はい、ありがとうございます。だから難しいですよね。大きな枠組みの中で自由度を持って、で自分たちの中でもまだデジタルの倫理みたいなことであるとか、そういうのがまだできてないからこそやるんだっていうことですよね。はい。I remember you were briefly talking about, digital is so yesterday that you don't have to do it. There was a little bit of pressure on to you. So you fought for that? I wasn't supposed to say it. Very sorry.
But that's totally fine because I think when you're an organization that is established to advance the role of design, we are always trying to look to the future. That's also why we wrote the book. But that does not mean that there are not some fundamentals we still need to work on. And in Japan, but also in Denmark, the fundamentals of digitizing services in a way that makes sense to people in their daily lives, it's still a challenge. It's still something we should be working on. Now, is that the role of the DDC? We'll share experience, but there are so many great designers, so many good agencies that know exactly how to do it. It's just a question of them getting to do the work for companies and public sector. And then our role is to kind of advance the field. But of course, sometimes we also need to go a little bit back and start with the fundamentals.
実はこの講演のきっかけになったときに、実はインタビューをさせていただいてたんですけど、その時に、政府からはもうデジタルは機能だともうやらなくていいじゃん、あんたたちっていうふうに一回釘を刺された。でも僕たちはそれを、拒否したっていう話を聞いていたんですね。でその最大の理由というのがですね、日本でもデンマークでももちろん、デジタルという技術に関してのですね、特にサービスをデジタル化するというところでは、まだまだ、そういうところをやれる領域というのがあるんですけれども、実はたくさん他にも自分たちだけじゃなくて、それに取り組めるエージェンシーっていうのはたくさんあって、ただ問題としては彼らが、例えば行政ですとか、重要な企業とか政府が提供しているサービスに彼らがその設計するという能力を提供できるかというところが一つある。そういう意味では自分たちが未来を切り開くという意味で、そういう領域がありますよと、そういうことができる人たちを、フロンティアみたいなものを作っていくことはもちろん必要ですと。ただ、時にはですね、一歩下がって、実際にそれらが本当に、人に豊かな社会をもたらしているのかというところで、一歩下がってですね、本質的な部分っていうのを、追求するということは、まだ担わなくてはいけないという話でした。だから未来も過去も、ちょっとだけ明日を見ながらもまた昨日にちょっと一歩下がるみたいな必要になってくるっていう話ですね。はい。I thought that's a really excellent story, so I thought I'd just dig in. はい。他にもちょっといくつかすごくいい質問があったと思うので、ちょっとこんな感じで、ちょっとまどろっこしいんですけど、進めていきたいというふうに思います。There's someone asking about the NASA spacesuit. NASA の宇宙服の事例がありましたけれども、日本では政治家、ビジネスの管理職、経営者の多くの割合が男性で占められていると。でそのような権威的なポジションにいる人たちのバルやプロクシミティを拡張するような事例アドバイス。すごいですね、これ本質的な。So, in Japan, still the politicians and business leaders are pretty much dominated by men. Yes, you've noticed, yes. So, is there any ways that we could give them an advice in terms of expanding the values and proximities? Is there any cases or advice that you could give?
Yeah, so the best advice is to bring more women, more young people, more diversity into organizations at all levels. We are also struggling for that in Denmark. At CEO level, it's less than 10% who are women in Danish corporates. Government ministers much better, generally, but it is a challenge. And in Denmark, there is a recognition that we may have to introduce quotas. So, for example, that 40% of board members must be female. And I think it's beginning to be recognized. So I'm not standing here saying that we are doing that well, but I'm saying that the best way to create proximity is to have a diversity inside your organization. Second best is to read the book and remember to do it.
はい。最後のジョークは分かりやすかったですね。本を読めっていうのが2つ目のやつですね。はい。実はデンマークもですね、まだまだ十分に女性の登用が進んでいるわけではないという話がありました。CEO のレベルになると女性は、It's just 10% women female
I think
CEO
actually it's less in the biggest companies, unfortunately. Yeah.
大きな企業になってくると、やっぱりその女性の登用、CEO っていうのはまたさらに割合が減っていくということでしたね。行政とか政府だともうちょっといいというような話でした。なので、別にデンマークが非常に進んでいるというわけではないんだけれども、大事になってくるのはどういうふうに、女性の登用もそうですけれども、ダイバーシティとかですね、そういうものを、積極的に、取り込んで、拡張していくかと、もうそれに尽きるというようなお話でした。はい、ありがとうございます。Yes. これは聞いときたいっていうのですか？これもいい質問がどこでした？
You're looking for the very difficult ones.
Yes. In terms of culture and location in the world, what are your expectations of Japan about 6 expansions?
Well, some of the conversations we've had the last week here in Japan about how Japan is doing in terms of global competition, economics, and around digital. And in some rankings, at least, Japan is doing not very well. And I think no matter what kinds of challenges you see as a society, whether we in Denmark are working on mental health, or you in Japan are looking at becoming maybe a more digital society, the hope is that the expansions will help you do it better, to think long term, to remember who we design for, to not digitize in ways that also damage the environment, for example. So it's part of the work on developing society, developing business, growing design as a field. I'm hoping the expansions can help, but I'm also aware that this is pushing to the next level, and that there can be some fundamentals that you need to get in place before starting to expand everything.
はい。先週から実はクリスチャン日本に来日していて、すでにいくつかのね、企業とか、人たちとお話を進めているということだったんですけれども、その中でも確かに日本は、経済とかある特定の産業分野ではそこまでうまくいってないというのは見聞きをしていますというようなお話でした。特に、ただ日本の場合にはですね、今デジタルというところでどういうふうにこれから社会を進めていけるかということが一つの大きなテーマになっているということは認識していますし、デンマークの場合はメンタルヘルスということが一つ今大きなテーマになっていますということでした。いずれにしても未来に向けてですね、こうテーマを考えていくと。特に、とにかく拡張していくというよりはですね、何を本質的にやらないかということを問いながら進めていくことがまた重要になってくるだろうというような話でした。
My name is Tatsuo Sato, and I'm teaching marketing and communication at Tama Art University, another major art university in Tokyo area. And my question is very fundamental one. It's about simplicity versus diversity. Simplicity means maybe one element or 2 or 3 elements, and diversity is contained 10 elements, 100 elements. For example, the US veteran website, one website versus more than 100 websites. So maybe we tend to lose, when we make it simple, we tend to lose something. So how can we handle with the simplicity, both simplicity and diversity?
Very, very good question. You want to translate?
はい、今すごく本質的な質問がありました。シンプリシティとダイバーシティという話でしたね。ダイバーシティって言ったとき、シンプルなものというのがもしかしたら非常にシンプルにものが作られていく、一つのウェブサイトで一つのことがちゃんとできると。で一方でダイバーシティですよね。コンプレックスだっていろんなものが内包されているものがあると。でシンプルなものにするときにいろんなものがそぎ落とされてしまって何かをその過程で失っているかもしれないと。でそれはどういうふうにしたらいいんだろうというようなこの2つのテーマの 間をどういうふうに行き来していくかというようなご質問でした。
No, great question. And I don't think there's a simple answer. But let me try a few reflections. So the design challenge, I think, often is to achieve simplicity while respecting and managing diversity. And if we take a step back and remember that human beings universally agree across cultures around what is beautiful. Actually, what's considered beautiful, it's surprisingly universal. You can listen to a talk by Stefan Sargmeister, the designer, to learn more about beauty and this point. In the same way, when it comes to dignity, to respect, to being treated positively, we have the foundation in human rights. We have some universal agreements and experiences as humanity around that. So I would say a starting point is to remember that some things are relatively universal. And then, of course, the detail of designing a single website that accommodates hundreds, if not thousands, of situations, that is intuitive, simple to navigate, easy to find yourself in, that's just a user experience challenge. And of course, also a systems challenge in getting the systems behind to work. I think I'm looking at all the Apple computers in the room, right? Across cultures, everybody loves them, right? It's simplicity, but it's also extremely sophisticated and can do many things in diverse settings. So I don't think it's impossible to have that incongruity, that dilemma resolved, but it requires, of course, very, very good and very, very hard design work to do it.
One thing which could be possible is that I think up to certain point, maybe the veteran affairs websites might have been functioning, but over the course, I guess it became like a spaghetti. It's just so complex. So I guess it's also the process that, maybe there is no ending, but maybe it's that iterative, reflective mindset that you need upon design.
Yeah, I think there's a term for it in physics. It's called entropy or entropy. And entropy means that the world keeps getting more complex and full of more waste unless we do something actively to go the other way. And so the sprawling websites or the sprawling regulation and rules in a society happen because no one is determined enough to simplify, to ask good questions, to also make things more efficient where that's possible. And I think that is in many ways the role of design, to ask those questions, challenge the assumptions. As an example, in Denmark, they're now blowing up the job center system because it's gotten too complex. So job centers, so helping citizens get jobs. It's so complex that politicians will take all the money away, but no one knows what to put instead. And that's very, very worrying, I think. So we need to bring design in to propose better models, better systems, and then the ones we have, not just destroy them.
So that means, well, we have a similar problem. There's a lot of job centers here in Japan, but so I guess the feeling is that it's not working.
Too expensive. We have very low unemployment, so why do we still have them? Citizens hate being regulated. There's too much bureaucracy. There's 30,000 pages of rules. So 30,000 pages of rules in employment policy in Denmark. 5 years ago, it was 20,000.
素晴らしい本質的な質問をいただいたので、やり取りが長くなってしまいました。ごめんなさい。一 一つですね、最初におっしゃっていただいてたのはですね、やっぱりユニバーサルに美しいものっていうのは一つしっかり考える必要があるでしょうと。デザインのチャレンジとしてはやっぱりこうシンプルで分かりやすく誰もが使いやすいというようなことで、まさに UX のチャレンジだと思うんですけれども、もちろんそういうものを探求しつつもどうダイバーシティを包摂するか、これは本当に難しい質問なんですけれども、例えば皆さんがApple のコンピューターを使っているようにですね、ある程度直感的で洗練された、シンプルなものを作るということは、難しいけれども可能ではあるというふうに考えているというのが、最初のご回答としてありました。その次にちょっと私の方で、質問をさせていただいていたのはですね、一度デザインしたもの、先ほどの退役軍人のサイトもですね、おそらく作った当初は機能していたと。ただそれが次第にですね、時間を経ることによって、複雑化したり、時代に合わなくなったりということがあったんではないかというような話をちょっとしていました。で、実際にですね、彼が今、物理的な法則でエントロピーっていうのがあるって話をしていたんですが、いろんなものがですね、混沌としていく中でですね、もう一度自分たちとしても、何のためのサイトだったのか、何を作らなければいけないのかという自分たちの仮説にチャレンジするということが非常に必要になってくるというような話がありました。実はジョブセンターのお話、今分かりました。ハローワークですよね、日本で言うと。仕事を斡旋するということはですね、デンマーク実は雇用はかなり、いいので、今まだそういう意味ではそこまでジョブセンターっていうのは必要とされてないんじゃないかという今コストカットの浮き目にあっているという話がありました。その中でもですね、非常にかなりヒエラルキーがあって構造化されていてコストも高いと、こういうものを維持する必要があるんだろうかっていうお話があるんですけれども、じゃあその代わりになるものって何なのって言ったらそこに対して実はまだ答えがないというような話がありました。じゃあどうしていくかということはまたこれからも引き続き問い続けなきゃいけないねという話をしておられます。はい。なかなか難しいですよね。はい。じゃあ、
Hi, thank you so much for inspirational presentation. My name is Fumi, and I'm from Japan Social Innovation Investment Foundation. I run what's called Impact Economy Lab. We just launched recently. So you mentioned about how our current economic system doesn't really embrace true values, and you mentioned about the Robert Kennedy's speech. So I was just wondering whether you can share your thoughts about how design can play a role, how to transform the economic system. I know it's a big question, but how can you go beyond each project that you're doing and then influence the economic system, maybe with the relationship with the government or others? はい、ちょっとビッグクエスチョンになっちゃうんですけども、このプレゼンテーションの中で私たちが今いる経済のシステムがいかにバリューっていうものをきちんと捉えてないか、いまだに GDP を主軸に意思決定されているっていうようなそういったところがあったので、デザインがそこの経済システムの移行っていったところにどういうふうに貢献できるのか、どうやって個々のプロジェクトを超えて、そういったところに影響を与えることができるのかっていうことについてのお考えをお伺いしたいと思います。
That's a really, really good question. And also it's fascinating you are running this organization. So congratulations on that. Well, I think designers have a huge responsibility to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to consider what outcomes, what value are you designing for? And historically, it's been profit. And that's gotten us into a lot of trouble, actually. It's also created some very affluent societies, but it's also gotten us into trouble in terms of the planet. And also look at the digital challenges we have in mental health. So it's a question of asking what value are we designing for? So for example, the Veterans Affairs example, they actually design for trust. That's very important, also very intangible metric, but they actually do that. To go further in a society as modern, as advanced as the Japanese, I think it's definitely possible, both for government, but also for business, to introduce other metrics, other measurements than economic ones as success criteria for good design. In government, that means not just saving money through digitization, but also creating wonderful, attractive service experience for citizens. In business, it means measuring the impact environmentally or socially of your business as much and publishing it as the economics. And we have a lot of examples in the book actually about companies that are doing that. And in turn, that means that the task to designers is to work with leaders in business, in government, to reach those objectives.
はい。非常にそうですね。まずはそういうね、組織がなかなか日本の中でもあるということを私たち自身もあまり知らないっていうのがあると思うんですけれども、まさにプロフェッションの中からご質問いただけたかなと思います。今のですね、この非常に成熟した日本のようなですね、近代的で洗練された社会がですね、行政ですとかビジネスの中でですね、新しいこれまでとは違った指標を持ってですね、何が起きているのか、どういうことがもたらされるかということを測るということは、おそらくできることであるというふうにおっしゃっていただいています。先ほどの待機軍人の人たちのサイトのね、リデザインみたいなお話もありましたけれども、ここでは信用をどう改めて獲得するかと、非常に信用を図るということは難しいんですけれども、それが一つのデザインにおける成功のクライテリアとしてきちっと掲げられていて、それがどのぐらい良くなったかということは測っていたというような事例もありましたと。で他にも、企業がどういう事例をどういうものをやっているかということは本の中にもたくさん書いてあるんですけれども、もちろん行政だとコストを削減するとか素晴らしいデザインを提供するということもありますし、ビジネスの場合にはですね、今までの経済的な指標だけではなくて環境あるいは社会というようなことに対してどういうインパクトをもたらすかということを計測するだけじゃなくて、まずは公表するということが非常に重要な、活動になってくるかなというふうに思っていますという話でしたし、行政としてはそれらをどういうふうにうまく促していくかというところに一つの役割があるというようなお話でした。はい、すいません、ちょっと時間があれなので一回区切ってもよろしいですか。申し訳ないです。はい。そしたらですね、I think the time is up. I thought time quickly passed. So we just want to close it, and then we will have a little bit more time left just to say hi directly to let you know who you are, and then to let the others out. はい。そしたらちょっと一度ここでもう45分になりましたので、オンラインの皆さんとはここで閉じさせていただいて終わりとしたいというふうに思っております。ちょっとこちらもドタバタしてしまって行き届かなかったところもあると思うんですけれども、今日は朝からですね、たくさんの方にご視聴いただいたり、ご参加いただいてありがとうございました。